Hannah Murray on TRE in the afternoon.
Good afternoon. Joining us on the line now is Kate Barron. She's a mother and adventurer who finished walking the whole of the UK coastline in the summer of 2023. Since then, she's been raising her son Magnus while exploring remote Scottish islands. In spring 2024, she and her adventurous family set off hiking and cycling the Atlantic coastline all the way from Norway to Portugal. Her book, Wilderness Mum, shares their story. Welcome to the show, Kate.
Hi, thanks so much for having me on.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thanks so much for joining us. So I'm dying to ask you about because there's a kind of hidden love story behind all this, how you ended up walking around the coastline of the UK, because you didn't do it alone.
No, I didn't. It was a whirlwind romance happening. Yeah. So basically, I met my partner on a Scottish cliff top at the bottom of 365 steps at the very northeast tip of Scotland. He was 3 years into his journey walking the entire UK coastline. And we had this really brief 3-minute encounter. I then disappeared to go and find a spot to camp for the night. And half an hour later, I did a U-turn and I bought 2 lots of fish and chips, a sausage for his rescued dog. And then we camped next to each other for the night. And, you know, on our third date, the third time I'd even met him, that was when I packed everything in about life as I knew it and decided to join him on this huge shared fundraising endeavour, walking the rest of the UK coastline.
Oh, amazing. So how do you go about doing a trip like that? How long does it take and how much rest is there in between?
Gosh, I mean, we did it every day, full time. So It was consistent for us, Chris for 6 years and me for 3. But what I would say is that you can't plan for something of that scale. I don't think. I think people can try, but you just never know what's going to happen every day. And I think that was part of the reason it worked for us, because we just took it step by step, day by day. And we were just sort of open to all of the all of the things that the journey threw at us. And it just took as long as it took.
So how come it took you 3 years and him 6 years? What did you do differently?
Well, he'd set off from Wales in 2017. Chris was an ex-paratrooper and had left the forces in order to raise his daughter on his own as a single father. He left in a bad place with mental health. You know, he was suffering really badly from anxiety and depression at the time, which is his reason for starting the walk. Right. And he did it for SAFA because as a veterans charity, they stepped in and helped him when he needed it. And so that was his reason for going. And it had taken him 3 years to get to the point where I met him, because essentially it had taken him 3 years to navigate all of the west coast of Scotland, all of the islands, including the Outer Hebridean Islands, the Northern Isles. He'd done a winter on the Outer Hebrides. He'd walked a whole other winter on Shetland, you know, living in a tent the whole time.
Wow.
And it was the wildness of it that took him so long, because he stuck so rigidly to the coast, you know, no roads unless absolutely necessary. So a lot of it was scaling mountains and, you know, a week or two at a time where he wouldn't see another soul. And he also spent the first lockdown on an uninhabited island on Shetland. So that
Wow.
sort of held him up.
Yes, my goodness. So at what point did you meet him then? Where did you start from?
So we met just as he came back to the mainland in this really serendipitous twist of fate. And then I started in November 2020 in Inverness. So I started there and then walked all the way down, you know, the rest of the east coast of Scotland, east coast of England, the south coast, and then up to the finish line in Swansea.
Wow. So when you're walking then, you say you're trying to avoid roads. You're trying to do literally the cliffs.
Yeah, we were right next to the cliff edge most of the time, whenever we could be. I think it was, you know, when I joined the walk, Chris had adopted this philosophy of sort of, if you're going to do something, do it properly. And he was adamant. I think partly just his nature, he sort of gets off on the extreme side of things. He's always been a man that's thrived on physical challenge. And so he enjoyed sticking as closely to the coast as he could. And so when I joined, it was a case of, well, I adopted the same philosophy, and that's what we did together.
Yeah. And what about sleeping? So you're in tents, as you say. Do you just like put up a tent by the side of the cliff? I mean, or are you going to campsites? How does that work?
No, yeah, so we only did campsites when we absolutely had to. So Scotland, with the outdoor access code, which is such a privilege to have here, meant that we could wild camp. We were able to wild camp. We were able to have fires, cook on fires and use fires to keep warm. And it was such a godsend. And it's part of why we fell in love with Scotland so much. And it was a huge part of the journey and became a lifestyle for us, because it wasn't just a trip that lasted a couple of weeks or a couple of months. We're talking years. And then when we got into England, obviously it's illegal to do that. But so we were nervous about it. And Chris had encountered some problems when he'd walked on the west side of England at the beginning of the trip. But it was just one of those things where it was the way that we lived, and so we just had to bite the bullet and go for it. And actually we found that we didn't have many problems. We wrote what we were doing on the side of the tent, so it was clear to anyone that passed us. These were sort of extenuating circumstances. And then we would also take other kind of outdoor. So we had a policy of sort of no indoor accommodation, but we would sleep in anything outdoors. So we'd sleep in barns and sheds and polytunnels, all of that kind of thing.
Gosh, I mean, I have to ask you about the weather. That seems you're not, I'm assuming you encountered lots of horrible weather and were pretty cold a lot of the time, I imagine.
Yeah, I think we lived pretty much permanently in a state of being cold, especially up in Scotland. And, we were doing it all year round, so definitely through the winter. And for me, I'd started at the beginning of a winter in Scotland on the northeast coast, where it can be brutally cold. I'd come from a scenario of a house with central heating and all the comforts and the mod cons, to then suddenly be thrown into life in a tent on the northeast coast of Scotland in winter. And that winter in Aberdeenshire, where we had the second lockdown, we ended up just camped up in a woodland for nearly 4 months, and temperatures went down to minus 17 degrees up there.
Oh my goodness.
It was absolutely freezing. And we just thank goodness that we were able to have a fire, because that was our lifeline. We were, most of our time during that lockdown was spent just collecting firewood and cooking by the fire and using that to keep warm. But yeah, it was incredibly challenging sometimes in the weather. And you look back on it, I think it's easy to look back with rose-tinted glasses, but even just experiencing the weather we've got now, so much rain here at the minute, and it has been like this for a while. And I think, gosh, this is, we walked and camped in this for days on end, sometimes weeks on end. So yeah, it was a definite challenge.
So, I mean, was it difficult to keep warm? I know you said you had the fire, but in terms of clothes, because obviously you would have had backpacks, but you wouldn't have wanted to take loads and loads of layers and coats and things with you. And what about cleaning clothes? How did that work?
Yeah, we had to be really ruthless with what we took with us, because obviously, we carried it all on our backs. We carried Bergens, which are those big military rucksacks. When I first joined, Chris immediately took me to one side and said, right, we need to half that. There's just no way that you are going to be able to carry that for as long as you're going to need to. So we had very little in the way of clothes. And yeah, it was just a case of, we wore all of our layers, and then at night time, snuggled up in our sleeping bag. And Jet was a big help. Our dog, she was like a hot water bottle that she was in between us. we both cuddled onto. For extra warmth. And then cleaning clothes. Sometimes we would clean them in the sea, in the river. Not ideal, but in burns. But sometimes, and then people were fantastic along the walk, and they'd say, look, if you need a washing machine, if you really need to have a shower, if it's been ages and you need to have a shower, come to the house. People reached out to us that way. It was amazing, part of the kindness of strangers that we experienced.
Oh, lovely. And what about baby Magnus? When did he come along?
Yeah, so 9 months into me joining the walk, I found out I was pregnant.
That was quick.
Yeah. Yes, it was much quicker than expected. So we kind of just started discussing the possibility of maybe having a baby, and then bam.
Wow.
It was very quick. And I was we were on the East Riding of Yorkshire at the time, and I found out in this sort of leaking shed. We were sleeping on hay bales in a leaky shed next to some horses.
Lovely.
And that's where I found out I was pregnant. And at that point, I knew, right, okay, I'm definitely going to be having this baby on the walk, because we were still so far from the finish line.
Oh, my goodness. And what was it like doing all this whilst heavily pregnant? I mean, that must have made it a lot harder.
You know, it did, but as soon as I found out I was pregnant, and yes, it was its first time motherhood, so I had no idea what I was in for, what to expect, but I just instinctively knew that I wanted to carry on. I thought, okay, I'm pregnant, but that doesn't mean that I need to stop. Despite that, we had a lot of support, but there were protestations and people telling us, we couldn't do it and I would need to stop. And of course I would need to go back and live in a house and Chris could finish without me and all the rest of it. And I just thought, no, why do I need to stop? I felt like it was a really healthy lifestyle for me to be pregnant in, and a fantastic lifestyle to bring up a baby in. And I did have a really smooth sailing pregnancy. Couldn't have gone any better.
Oh, wonderful. So how soon after you had Magnus did you carry on walking?
Well, I had a great pregnancy. I didn't have a great birth.
Oh.
So I had quite a traumatic birth, actually. And so my postpartum experience was incredibly challenging. But so he was 3 months old because I had an emergency C-section in the end. So I had to wait 12 weeks before I was able, because that's just the bare minimum recovery time. And in actual fact, it takes far longer. But in order for me to even begin to walk again, that's how long I had to wait. But it was definitely challenging logistically, because I also had challenges of breastfeeding and things, which meant we had to bottle feed, which was, 8 to 10 feeds a day with a newborn. And we had to we were just boiling, just to get our hands on enough water to do that, and boiling the water, sterilizing it all. And so it was a massive, huge logistical challenge, but I have just the best memories of those early months with him, his newborn phase, and me as a mum. That my first time experience as a mum, the way that we were able to bond and share that really special time walking the coastline together, despite all the challenges, I will never regret doing that.
That's lovely. And tell us about your last adventure I mentioned, hiking and cycling the Atlantic coastline from Norway to Portugal. Wow.
Yeah, so very ambitious. Another ambitious undertaking. I think we felt like, if we were able to do the walk and do it with a newborn, then it was sort of like the world was our oyster and we were able to do we were able to achieve anything. But it wasn't that simple. We lost our dog. So Chris rescued Jet on the walk, and she meant everything. And she died the following year. So we knew that she was, sort of heading that way. Once the walk had finished, she declined quite rapidly. And so we didn't do any, we had this big transition period for a year. And then following that, we decided, we wanted to start this big adventure. And we started in Norway. And we did, we made some good progress. But Magnus then turned 3, and he turned 3 in Norway, and it became very clear to us that he wanted to interact with other children his own age on a more frequent basis. And so we've actually pressed pause on that adventure for now. And Magnus, we're on the Scottish mainland. Magnus is going to an outdoor forest kindergarten 3 days a week. So we're trying to combine the best of both worlds at the moment for him, giving him the outdoor experience in kindergarten up in Scotland here, where he's got other children his own age to play with and make friends with. whilst adventuring. And so while that's on hold for a couple of years while we do this, Chris has now actually started cycling the entire UK coastline, which he started a month ago. Yeah, so I think he felt like he needed a big adventure, a big challenge in the interim. So he started cycling it and for a children's charity, actually, called Make-A-Wish UK.
Oh,
which
great
is what,
charity.
he's doing really well. Yeah, and he's raised 4,000 already.
Amazing. So does this mean you're not going to see him for years, or is he coming home in between?
Yeah, I'm really hoping it doesn't take years. I'm hoping it just takes the maximum of one. But the idea is, Magnus is just at kindergarten three days a week. So the idea is that we go and join him for long weekends and all the holidays. So it's an adventure that we'll definitely be part of. And Magnus loves being on his bike. So I think it'll be a really lovely one.
Yeah. And people can follow all your crazy adventures on Facebook, can't they? The Wilderness Family.
Yeah, that's it. Wilderness Family and Wilderness Mum. And the same on Instagram as well.
Ah, perfect. Great. Well, if people want to get a copy of the book, it's called Wilderness Mum, How I Left City Life Behind to Raise a Family in Nature. It's available on our website, tre.radio, in the bookshop section. And it's by Kate Barron, who we've been chatting with. Kate, thank you so much for joining us. Lovely to chat with you.
Oh, lovely to chat with you. And thanks so much for having me.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.